Greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation on preparing applications for admission. We're really excited that you are here with us. My name is Darren Worcester. I am from EMA and admission.org. A couple quick housekeeping things before we get started. We're going to be going through the questions that all of you submitted when you registered for the event. Thank you very much for doing that, by the way. And we've grouped them into categories and that sort of stuff. We're answering questions that ultimately will address everyone here today as a whole. The big caveat to this is always if you've got something really specific to your situation or something you're concerned about, with your application, that sort of thing, always reach out directly to the schools that you're applying to. Their answers may vary from school to school. So don't just assume that one answer fits all situations. I would also like to say that the presentation today is brought to you with support from Kimball Union Academy, and we greatly appreciate them supporting this presentation. If you are not familiar with Kimball Union Academy, also known as KUA, they are a day and boarding school in beautiful Meriden, New Hampshire, for co-ed day and boarding, for grades 9 through 12 and postgraduate. And with that, today's featured guest is Josh Labove. He is the Director of Enrollment Management at KUA. Josh, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Now, Josh, you wanted to kind of start off with seeing all the questions. You had some general tips, I believe, that you wanted to start off with.
Yeah. Just wanted to say hello to everyone. I've been doing this for a little while, and I did some quick counting and figured that I had read something like 40,000 admissions essays in my career so far. So I know a number of folks have questions about the essay, and we could spend hours just talking about what makes great admissions essays. But needless to say, I've read a few of them in my day. We're going to talk about the application today, and as you start to think about finalizing it, in an admissions office, we really think about it in these buckets. The application forms, an interview, possibly testing, and optionally, generally, a visit. And in that application forms bucket, that includes the transcripts, the teacher recommendations, the essays, the parent statements, activities, supplemental materials. And I imagine we're going to have a lot of questions that live there in how do we get those forms complete and done. There were just a few quick tips that I had just to kind of give you something to chew on as we start to have this conversation. Control what you can. There's so many things you're going to be asking of people, whether it's you need those SSAT scores sent in, or you need a teacher recommendation sent in. Focus on the pieces that you need to submit. So really that's parent statement, the application, what we call the part one, the biographical information, student essays. Focus on controlling what you can, getting that stuff in on time. Of course, communicating with schools and letting us know if something is going to be delayed or won't be coming through traditional means. Generally, I've worked in college admissions and boarding school admissions. We're much smaller, right? Even the biggest boarding or day school is not working at the scale of your nearby university, and so there's a little bit more nimbleness here built into the process. You can let us know, and we're generally able to accommodate. That being said, timing. I know a number of folks were wondering, does it help to get that application in early? And we're not talking about early decision programs, which a number of schools have started to offer, but really just timing your application within the cycle. And the quick answer for me is no. Generally speaking, you can trust what a school says on their website. And if a school says an application is due on January 1 or February 1 or February 15th, that means that's when they're going to start sitting down and reading the applications. And an application that you're proud of is always better than one that was quickly submitted. Give yourself time to write the best application you can, rather than trying to rush thinking that you've somehow gotten an early read. That generally isn't the way things happen in admissions committees. And lastly, and this is going to be different, I think, if you've sent kids off to university or college, you don't really have a parent statement but it's something that really does matter. It is part of the admission.org process, the SAO, the standard application online, and it's one of the first things that I read. They give us a sense of what you're looking for, parents, as you think about um, boarding or day school or what comes next for your child. And so, while you can't really tailor them to each individual school, being able to talk succinctly but clearly in the macro sense about what it is you're looking for that next school for your child is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about as we try to evaluate fit. So those are just some early tips for me. And Darren, I'll hand it back to you. I know you've got a whole list of questions over there.
I do a lot of those categories we're going to dig into a little deeper. But let's just start. The one thing I think everybody's wondering, we got this question asked so many different ways, ultimately boils down to, how do you prepare a good application? Kind of what is your reading application, Josh? What stands out to you as, hey, this is a KUA student, or, insert any other school there?
Yeah. It's you're going to hear schools talk about fit a lot, which is it's funny because at the same time we're also talking about you applying to six, seven, potentially eight schools, and so fit with a very big asterisk, right? Like, we want you to have done the work and to narrow down among all the schools that are out there, down to a select number that really feel right for you and that you can speak broadly to, recognizing that you're speaking to a number of us at once. Um, that it that everything together starts to tell a story, that you've picked um, recommendations, teachers who are going to be able to um, they don't need to say, that you're the best student ever or the most thoughtful or the most charitable, but they need to be able to confirm the story that you're telling in your application. So um, you think you're super curious and going to be really engaged in, the drone science club that we have at KUA. It's great to see that in the teacher recommendations that we get. We have very little time, and this is the window that we get to understand you. And so everything that can confirm and supplement the story that you're beginning to tell, that produces clarity. We like to see that. It signals kind of a degree of organization. I think unlike a college application, we expect that students who are applying for high school admission are still figuring a lot of it out, and that's okay. When you're applying to college, you have to declare a major and really start to think about, what that's going to mean for your future. And we almost prefer that you didn't do that, right? We'd like to see students who are somewhat more malleable and ready to approach the broad liberal arts of a college prep school with a lot of excitement. And so there's a temptation, I think, to be caught specializing, and that's not it's not where we live, right? That's not what we do. We have some programs that we're really proud of. We have a jewelry making studio on campus, for instance, but you're still going to have to take 4 years of English, and we want to see, what you're going to do in science and in our history electives. And so resist the temptation to be too overly specialized.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You gave, one really good tip in terms of, don't feel like you need to submit applications early,
Yep.
that schools really don't start reviewing until after the set deadline, unless they
Right.
are enrolling in mission school. Any other tips? Anything you see that parents do in the applications or families do when they submit applications that kind of leaves you with the impression that maybe they're misunderstanding the process or what's being asked?
I think it's important to have conversations early with schools about what their learning support programs look like, and to be honest, and ask good questions of schools about the supports that you're looking for your student. Recognizing that while it's an evaluative process, it's also one based on fit. And I think sometimes families don't share that information, really to the detriment of of student and teacher, because we're going to support and serve a wide variety of learners. Most schools are, but we're just better served and better equipped to do that when we have more information early on. Um, I think um, there you see sometimes families that will assume, so for instance, at KUA, we're maybe known for having a really strong hockey program. You don't have to love hockey to come to KUA. In fact, we have plenty of students who are interested in the hockey program. And so I think there are sometimes students and families that assume that that is a strength that they should lean into, whether or not it's a strength that they actually want to lean into. If you love hockey and you want to play hockey at KUA, we'll be in touch. But if you don't really love hockey, you don't need to tell us that you love hockey. That there's plenty of folks that are going to be busy doing that at KUA that will fill an applicant pool many times over. So focus on the things that you really care about. Don't try to second guess what you think the school wants to hear.
Great. One thing I often wonder too, and I give families when I'm talking is that, as great as the standard application online is, and we encourage families to use it because it can help save them time. To some degree, I fear it almost makes the process too easy, where you can just go apply to a school. So I often kind of say too, like, don't be an unknown. Don't just submit an application without engaging in the school in some shape or
Yeah.
form. Like you want, ideally, have an interview, go to an open house, do that stuff if you can, but don't just submit an application and cross your fingers. I mean, from your perspective, how do you see that?
Yeah, we track interests, right? Every school that you're applying to has invested in pretty advanced databases. We know when you called and when you emailed and, when you opened our emails and clicked our links. And we want to know that you engaged with us, right? We spend a lot of time and energy thinking about how we can inform you, about our unique programs and offerings. We want to know that you did. And so, the applicant who fires off an application through a common system, I would say, even still, most schools have a general admissions inbox, admission at KUA.org, admission at pick your school. And that's a great starting point to think about scheduling a visit, to think about just asking some questions and building a rapport with the school. It does signal a degree of seriousness, of intent, of interest. Schools want to know that if you were admitted, that you would come, and what that might look like. And so while it's really easy to apply, and maybe those of you that are applying right now don't feel like it's super easy, but it is definitely easier than it used to be, to apply. We'd still really love to see that you know what you're applying to. I'd say there's a fine line and balance here, right? We don't need to hear from you, every day what you had for breakfast, how your workout routine is going, how the set's being built in on your school play. But building a rapport and a connection, most schools that you're looking at have a Meet the Admissions Team page on their website where you can connect with anybody in their admissions office. Find those people who are doing things on campus that speak to you. So maybe you want to connect with the admissions officer who's also the alpine ski director or the basketball coach. Well, those are available to you, and those are people that you can reach out to and develop connections. You don't have to just talk to the director of admissions. There's plenty of people in these offices that you can reach out to and start to develop some connections.
Awesome. I feel like I need to sort of clarify with the easy statement. You still need to do the student essay and,
Yep.
the recommendation forms and testing if the school requires testing. So there is a lot involved in building the application. What I meant more is once you've got the standard application set
Yep.
up, all the documentation
Yeah. The
collect,
incremental
you
cost is,
you can just
yes.
submit. You don't have to keep recollecting that information. So that's the
Yeah.
easy part. Don't by any means, put stuff off thinking it's going to be easy to apply.
Well, and what I always say to parents is like, look, you don't need to get into 7 schools. And I actually kind of hope you don't, because come March and April, that's not going to be easy. It's not going to be terribly simple to make a decision about the one school you're going to go to. So, I mean, I hope you get into some, 2, maybe 3 schools. You have some choices and some basis for comparison. But, the world where you're applying to a litany of schools, you just run the risk of potentially making your spring just that much more taxing. So maybe step one in preparing applications is thinking about preparing a few less.
Josh, we talked a little bit about what you were looking for in applications, and you did a great job of explaining, every school is kind of looking to identify the right fit for their school, but that's a two-way street. I
Sure.
think my favorite question that we got was, someone wrote, how do they identify the school that best suits their kid? As the parents and the families are evaluating schools, what should they look for or ask about when they're meeting with the schools?
She asked a ton of questions. I mean, one thing I'll say is I think that kids are um, who are ready and excited about boarding school and in particular, and great kids will find great places, and a lot of these places that you're going to be looking at are great. And so step one is to turn the temperature down. I think sometimes we go into the process of looking at schools and saying, if it's not one of these three, then my child is doomed. It's probably not true, right? There's probably a lot of great places out there. And so if we can start from a place where the anxiety is really low, then we can be thoughtful and critical about what the differences are between these schools. So I'm in New Hampshire, right? There's a myriad of interesting schools in New Hampshire, some big, some small, some all boarding, some all day. Just in my tiny state, there's plenty to look at. But if you don't turn the temperature down, you could become really myopic about it and only look at a few. And so step one, great kids end up making great choices and end up getting the most out of whatever school they go to. Number two, the more you're able to start to compare and contrast, you can understand that there's features and benefits. So this school does it that way, and this school does it that way. But maybe the differences are not all that consequential. So really starting to like go on a couple tours, go on a couple information sessions, and figure out, know your child, know yourself as a student, and go, well, what works for me? What do I do now in school? What kind of environment am I in now? Is that working for me? Do I want something different? How different? And then what are the differences that don't really matter? And begin to kind of work from there. There's all sorts of criteria that you can assess schools on, whether they're parochial, day, boarding, 5-day boarding, what they serve in the dining hall. And some of those data points ultimately aren't going to matter to your child, right? When they step onto a campus that feels right for them, all that kind of washes away. And so I think there's an art to it, there's a science to it, and giving yourself room to allow for both of those things, I think comes from a fair degree of fluency about what's working or not working now in school, and an appropriate level of visits, but not so much that it all starts to just become mush in your brain.
Excellent. Thank you. So you did address early on in the beginning um, the tip of, you don't need to rush an application to submit it ahead of the deadline, but can you tell us a little bit about sort of we're getting into deadline period for many schools, what some of the common dates are that folks should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of schools will be January 1, 15, February 1 are going to be common dates. And really what we say is that's an application submission date, and you should check with every school you're applying to. Um, but that means things are going to kind of dribble in after that deadline, and we're still going to consider that application complete. Just like on the college side, we're really we want to see the student piece of the application come in, on time, on that deadline. And then we spend a little bit of time tracking down those final pieces of a file. Most boarding schools commit to a March 10th notification on or about, letting you know by March 10th. Obviously, day schools in many different areas have all sorts of different approaches to that, but in the boarding world, it tends to be March 10th. And then April 10th tends to be the day that we say, okay, you've heard from us. Now we'd love to hear from you. And in between March 10th and April 10th, a number of things happen. Uh, Typically, schools like KUA are on spring break. We come back from spring break and we invite families to come visit us on the hilltop, to see us on campus. And most schools do that as well for what we call revisit days. And those dates are up on our website. They're up on a lot of schools' websites right now, so you can start to plan. And you should, softly imagine that if you're going through this process right now, that you would hear back from a school by March 10th, and that if you needed those revisit windows, that you would be doing that in the third and fourth week of March.
That works. Thank you for outlining that. One person asked, is it possible to waive the application fee? And I just wanted to kind of comment on that from the EMA perspective that, there are fee waivers for using our tools, whether it be the SSAT, Character Skill Snapshot, or the SAO. I will put into the webinar chat a link where you can look up the general guidelines for those. What we ask is that we don't actually hand out the fee waivers, that you would get the fee waivers from the schools, and the guidelines, while they are our guidelines, the school may interpret them differently, especially in the case of the SAO fee waiver, because that waives our fee, which is a pretty nominal fee on the SAO, as well as the school's application fee. So that's really more their decision to make on that. Josh, is there anything you would add to that?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. Certainly there are a number of costs associated with applying, whether it's fees associated with financial aid applications, testing, visiting. Every school will have different approaches to that and different scholarship and financial aid policies. And so it's worth engaging with that process early and learning as much as you can about the vocabulary around financial aid. This is not, a financial aid webinar. Suffice to say, it's a huge part of the conversation for many families, and one that you should start having early. I would say when you're thinking about the fee waiver, you really want to keep in mind that, this is this should be a cost that is just far beyond your ability. And so we anticipate, and I think most schools would anticipate, that for you, the full cost of education is something that you would also need covered. And if those two things are not aligned, if you're just like, I could really use a little help here, it would be nice to not have to pay for this thing, you may find that that's not really how schools are interpreting it.
All right. Thank you for that. So I think the biggest category where everyone had the most questions are around the parent statement. And if so, I can sort of distill what many of the questions were ultimately boiling down to. I think, a lot of parents really wonder, as they're going to write the statement, is how do they balance between the factual and the emotional? Should they just stick to the facts? But we're parents. We want to gush about our children. And, we obviously have an emotional
Yeah.
connection to that and what we want to write. How do you see it on your end? What do you look for, in those statements?
So I'm looking for our partners in educating a child. And I'm reading the parent statement to understand very quickly, does this align with how their teachers are talking about them? Does this align with how we're talking about the student from what we saw in the interview process? Is the parent statement giving me the sense of a parent who is going to, be wind at my back and a support to our faculty? Or is the parent statement giving me the sense that this parent may not totally understand the challenges that their student faces? And so more important than gushing is is to approach the parent statement, I think, with as cool-headed and rational as you can. It doesn't have to be all facts. We'd love to know what insights and what makes your kid tick that we wouldn't maybe have learned in other parts of the application. But we would like to know that you're clear-eyed about who they are, where they have room to grow, and what you hope they grow into in a new school environment.
So I think you hit on the vein there of sort of what was going to be my next question, in the clear-eyed perspective in terms of, I think a lot of parents really, as they're writing this, really kind of question, and I don't, struggle might not be the right word, but, try to understand like how much is saying too much, how much is not saying enough. We had one person say, should a kid's anxiety be disclosed in the parent statement? And you could, let's change anxiety out for many other learning challenges, right? So I think they're trying to kind of understand and balance, what do we say that, potentially could influence the decision, but also, we want to make sure the school has the right support services.
You
Um,
do. Yeah. Schools are not going to make an admissions decision based upon um, anything in a student's medical record. And I think that's important to know. And I say that to give families hopefully the permission to start talking frankly about who their kids are and the challenges that they face. I will say most of us that work with teenagers in 2024 understand that anxiety is unfortunately all too common. And so the things that you might find challenging or shocking or confusing or confounding in your home are not so in ours. We're more equipped and expect to see more of this. Anybody who spends time with 300 plus teenagers has seen more of this than you might care to imagine. So, as much as you can share, the better. I think you can offer context. You can offer a little bit more clarity. Teachers see students sometimes, particularly in a day school, for just a couple, maybe an hour a day. You can offer some context into who they are beyond that hour. And I would argue that, if you feel like you're sharing too much, that this is the kind of thing that's going to be disqualifying, I would have some severe questions about what kind of school you're applying to, and maybe more to the point, what idea you have about the school you're applying to, because most schools, most EMA members are going to treat the information that you share with the utmost of confidence and appreciation, and really work to find a fit. And they want to understand that you're aligned in partnership with us in wanting the best for your child, whether they're at KUA or anywhere else.
Such a great point. Again, it's back to the two-way street, right? Like families want to make sure that the school has the support systems and the things in place that their
Yep.
child need to succeed. All right, so we've got. There were a lot of questions about the student essay. Of course, if you're waiting for
Yep.
that, I see you. It's coming. We got quite lots of questions about the SSAT, so we're going to get that in. Interviewing questions. Lots of great questions left to ask Josh. But Josh, we're at our halfway point. I would love it if you could take a few minutes and tell us a little bit more about KUA.
Sure. And I just, have a few quick slides. I'd love to just show a few images of campus life. We call it the hilltop. Those of you that have been to campus or will come to campus will discover very quickly what it means to be on our hilltop campus. It's quite steep. But just to give you a sense of what it feels like, KUA, the 15th oldest boarding school in the country, and a place where we're going to talk a lot about learning by doing, really, predicated a lot on the best of what we know in brain science. So really trying to employ the best of brain science to teaching and learning to make learning fun. we're a school with a really rich history, but we're not bound by tradition. So we're constantly thinking of the best ways to use our environment, whether that's our neighbors in Dartmouth College and in creating scholar programs that more intentionally connect our students to the work at an Ivy League university, or that's a fully student-run farm on campus. You're going to find a beautiful setting and a lot of ways that we go about trying to use it. And so, you know, if you're coming to us from the Northeast today, Boston or New York, we're just up the road where 89 and 91 meet. We'd love to see you. Of course, come and explore the Upper Valley more broadly, see our location, see what it has to offer for students, and see what it means for kids to be able to explore, a Ivy League college town most weekends, and to become outdoorsy if you're not already, to see what's possible, and how community can be built when these are the things in your backyard. So whether it's feeding our campus pigs to divert, food scraps, food waste from the landfill, or it's canoeing on Chalice Pond, or hiking up the neighboring mountain to take in the fall foliage, there are just so many opportunities at KUA to live and learn and build community together, and to just enjoy the beautiful space that we share. We are predominantly a boarding school, 260 plus students living together in unique dorm houses dotted along a historic main street. And so it's going to feel very quickly, maybe not like, some of these big dorms that you might have seen on boarding school campuses, really instead something that feels more like home. And we think that's really, part of what makes KUA special. And that's part of what makes the transition to a place like KUA, we think, so smooth. And, we'll talk more about that. But when all of this is at students' disposal really quickly, and they can navigate it from a small, close-knit dorm where they're living alongside multiple faculty, 2, 3 faculty holding their homes with their children and their dogs, 35 dogs on the hilltop, makes it more and more of a community for our students. And so, very, very definitively and distinctly for us, is KUA design, our approach to teaching and learning, 4 sciences that we think hold together the way that learning ought to be. So we talk about the science of wellness, the science of individuality, the science of knowledge, and the science of relationships that undergirds everything we do, whether we're talking about our championship sports, our theater program, or we're talking about what happens in the classroom. Our scholar programs, opportunities to delve in deeper into the arts, into STEM, and into global affairs. Learning by doing options that get students deep into our community and far around the world. We're the only school in North America with a connection to schools on every other continent. So our students went to Peru last summer, and they'll be off to Australia this summer. And just interesting opportunities to take what they're doing in the classroom and go on exchanges to schools all over the globe. And just very quickly, a few of those things that happen beyond the academic day. When we read applications, we often think about students who are ready for the afternoon. And so as you think about the second half of questions to come, and you think about your essays, I would say, how are you talking about yourself as ready for everything that happens when the school day is over? At a boarding day school like KUA, we think a lot about the arts, and we think a lot about athletics as that thing that happens. Sometimes it's half a day, sometimes it's the lower third of the day. But what is your readiness and your excitement to jump in to the afternoon? And that, I think, is a hugely defining feature of a successful applicant. So at KUA, everything you see in this picture was designed by students, whether that's our theater tech program, or our set design or stage design program, or choreography program, where students learned how to walk on stilts. And so we're looking for students that want to take part in those things. Any school that you're interacting with that can share this with you can only share this because they have students that want to do it. And so while it's great, we have it. More important than that is we have students every year that are excited by it and animate it and make it theirs and make it anew. And so I would say more than anything, as you think about your applications, think about um, being able to speak to the ways in which you're going to jump into all the things that are happening every afternoon. At KUA, athletics are a love language. And they're also a vehicle for us to talk about teaching and learning, to teach those big lessons. We've got 18 varsity sports and then many, many more for students to dive into. We're certainly well known for a number of them. But you're going to be able to play at that right level. So whether you're playing with NHL aspirations for our varsity hockey team, or you just want to get out there and have fun on any number of clubs and teams, certainly mountain biking on our beautiful 1,300-acre campus in the fall, or golf or tennis in the spring, you're going to find lots of opportunities to, again, learn by doing. Our coaches are your dorm parents. They're your mentors and advisors. And we think it just makes the coaching better. We think it amplifies what's happening in the classroom. It builds school spirit. It's obviously important to us, and you'll find that it's important to a lot of the schools that you're looking at too, that we find students that either bring a passion or are ready to discover one when they get to places like ours. So thank you. I know we're here to talk about your application to any number of schools, so I appreciate the opportunity to just share a few pieces of information. Hopefully I've piqued your interest, and if I have, visit KUA.org. We'd love to meet you, whether that's on the road or on our Hilltop campus. But I know there's so many more questions to get to, and I'm delighted to jump into that.
Excellent. Josh, thank you for that. For families that are looking at KUA or boarding schools in general, how long do you see, does it take students that are, coming into a boarding environment and being away from home for the first time to really get acclimated?
I think something happens in October, sort of magically, at any boarding school. The temperature drops, the work's getting a little bit more intense. We're on the trimester system at KUA, so we're really getting into it at that point. And the sports teams are really going at that point. The fall play is off and running, and so by the time you get to Halloween, to the end of October, it's sort of full tilt, right? You've had that first set of comments come home, and you've got a friend group, and you've had a dance or two, and you've kind of gotten a sense of the cadence of this. That I tend to find that sometime, that first 4 weeks, parents, if you can really resist the temptation to call and call and call again, but really start to give students just a little bit more space every day, whether they're asking for it or not. I know many aren't, but over time, you're going to find bigger gaps between the phone calls and the emails, and it's really just because they're busy and they're having fun.
Excellent. Thank you. So I promised that we would get into the essay questions. So let's have at that. What to you, Josh, stands out? What makes a good student essay?
It's hard to say that there's like one thing that makes a great essay. I used to say, oh, I love a sense of humor, and then I got lots of essays that were not really funny. If you're not funny, don't be funny, right? Look, don't assume that there's a topic that's just going to be so new and cutting edge, and that will somehow mask over any kind of grammatical errors or sloppiness. We've read it all. And so I'd say it's much more important that you write a good essay that is succinct. We talk about 500 words on average, so it's not super long. Rather, it's an opportunity for you to tell a story. We'd like to know something about you. Oftentimes students will really try to find, a challenge in their life, and they can't, or they will try to find an adult that they really connect with, and they struggle. If the topic doesn't speak to you, pick a topic that does. Write to something that feels true to you. You don't have to talk about challenge if you feel like, you know what, I haven't really been through a lot of challenges. You know, we see a lot of essays about Taylor Swift. Um, and I did see a fair number of essays about The Last Dance. Um, that doesn't mean that your essay about Taylor Swift can't be a good one. It just means that um, if you thought about a topic, I can guarantee you by just sheer numbers, there's probably 10 other kids who have as well. And so the closer to the bone you can get, the more true to yourself you can get in writing it, um, the less likely it is to be repetitive and boring. And when it's repetitive or boring to us, we stop reading, just like you would, right? And so if you can keep us engaged by offering us something that is closer to a story about you, um, all the better for that. Um, I think anytime you can demonstrate some vulnerability or tenderness, if you've done something that isn't particularly cool, um, and you can stand behind it unironically, I love that. I love to see when, kids can have a little bit of a heart on their sleeve, because those are the communities that we want to build. We're looking for that. So I get a little tired of expertise, or the know-it-all, or the did-it-all, or the champion of the world. We've seen it. And those don't tell us much about who you're going to be when you come to campus. If you had a great experience living on a boat, or building wells in Madagascar, it doesn't really tell us who you're going to be when you come to KUA. And so, stripping all that away, if the story or the narrative gets us to learning more about what makes you tick and what kind of roommate you're going to be, um, your sense of humor, or um, your romanticism, or your nostalgia, or your love of family, great, because that tells us about your values. Those are the things that you don't lose, whether you're hiking on a mountain, you're negotiating and navigating with a roommate. Those are the things that we think are a little more ride or die.
Excellent. And I think the one other question parents, often have with, what's fair game in terms of giving their kids guidance? I know I saw some parents said, we're usually just let the kid do it and, they're on their own. Others, will be heavily involved, with guidance and tips and editing. What, from your perspective, is the expectation when you're receiving a student's essay for the level of guidance that they may have received?
I mean, you can give your child as much guidance as you like. I know when the essay was written by a 13-year-old and when it was written by a 53-year-old. And I would much rather read an essay written by a 13-year-old. That's why I'm doing this work. So, what's fair game? Whatever you'd like, but if at the end of the day, if it doesn't sort of read like we think, um, this is an essay by a 13-year-old, by a 14-year-old, then it didn't serve your child well. And so again, it's about everything adding up to create a cogent narrative. If we've got a story about your child being a math prodigy who doesn't really love expressing themselves in written form, and then we have the next Steinbeck in these essays, we might be scratching our head. And many of our schools have honor codes, and so it may not ring particularly true, or as we would say, mission appropriate, for those essays to feel so far away from the student that's otherwise been presented. So they ought to be honest, and what I think where a parent is best served is to be a fair mirror back to your child and to say, this is not you, or this is the best version of you. I would encourage you to polish it up or think about how you can better represent what I know to have been true for you in that situation.
We're right in that period of time where hopefully families have got their letters of recommendation requests out there. Someone asked how many recommendations. I think the advice is look at each individual school and what they're asking. But in general, I think one challenge families may be running into at this point in time is, they've asked for a recommendation and they haven't received it yet.
Yep.
They're getting nervous because the deadline's coming. What should they do in that situation?
You got to be careful with that anxiety because you still need something from someone here, right? You're asking um, teachers to do something unpaid out of the kindness of their heart over their holiday break. We're not losing our minds about this, right? We'll let you know when it becomes an issue that gets in the way of giving your child a fair read in the admissions process. And today we're a long way from that. You may get to that point later on, and make a game time decision with schools to get a different recommender involved, or schools may guide you to scrap that recommendation altogether. But we're a ways away from that. But I would say you want to be giving your teachers and your recommenders as much information as they ask for and need to write compelling recommendations early, and then trusting their process to let them get that in, and recognizing that it may happen after your deadline. Your deadline is the important one. If they slip in after January 1 or January 15th or February 1, it is usually not an issue.
How about parents helping students prepare for the interview? Are there any good tips on things that they can do there?
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't want to see kids who are overly coached. And so we try to have a conversation. The best interviews for us are, kind of freewheeling explorations of what you're passionate about. And so I think parents have probably already prepared students for an interview in the way that they've raised them. If you've raised your child to look someone in the eye, shake their hand, ask them about their day, you've done your job, and you can trust that those skills will endure when they go and chat with an admissions officer. If you're just kind of running lines with your child, that probably won't hold up. In the course of the conversations that we hope to have.
Not that I didn't just hear you, but I am going to drop in the chat some other interview advice that we have, which does include practice questions.
Sure.
But to your point, it's always good to prepare, and every kid what they need is probably different. So, don't overpress and over interview. There's some questions there for the kids that are really nervous and anxious to kind of help them pass that.
Totally.
One thing we've always said or thought is like, it's probably also not the parent who should be, asking them some questions that's, and at least if it's me and my kids, that's going to end up like this.
Right. It doesn't end up well.
Very, very
Yeah.
quickly. So, I'd often say, like, have a neighbor or friend, someone who's familiar with them, but not too familiar. Just ask them a few questions just to warm them up.
Have fun with this process, as best you possibly can. I mean, one thing that happens sometimes in all of this prep is kids show up and they look utterly miserable, because you're nervous as a parent. You have you've been just going through a battery of questions over flashcards with them, and so they're sitting in our waiting room and they don't want to talk to you because they can just feel that anxiety wafting off of you. Um, and then I've got like a teenager sitting in our waiting room who's like not being particularly warm and friendly with their parents, which is not a great look either. So I would say resist the temptation because what we'd love to see is a parent and student who have a warm and convivial relationship. And if your child is just like ready to take your flashcards and throw them out the window, um, we're going to feel that. And that may be the only time we get to see the two of you together. So I always say, trying to limit the number of schools that you visit and interview at to no more than two a day, trying to find some fun things that you can do over the course of, your time on the road or visiting schools, whether that's going to a professional sports game or visiting a college or eating some good food. Because if it's just school, 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 interview, 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 fix your hair, tuck your shirt in, then, that third school, that fourth school that you visit for an interview, just captures a kid at like utter, like just done, just absolute cooked. So, at that point, it's not worth it and it's not effective.
Great, thank you. So we did get a bunch of questions about financial aid. It
Sure.
wasn't the intent to get into those with this presentation because we just did a financial aid
Yeah.
presentation a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to share in the chat a link to that presentation and a couple other resources where we have Q&A that really get into what schools look
Yep.
for, their criteria, and the documentation that you need for financial aid. But just to quickly run through some of the basics that folks often have. Financial aid application deadlines are typically in line with the school's application deadline. You will get a notice at the same time as the application deadline so that you can review them in tandem. International applicants usually can apply for financial aid, but talk to the school. Every school is going to treat that a little differently, probably. And when we talk about financial aid, we're typically talking about, need-based grants. It's not quite like college where schools offer a lot of merit-based scholarships. You may find that from time to time, but that's less common at the K-12 private school level. Any other like high-level basic thing I'm forgetting?
I would say that a lot of us use a service called Clarity. I'm not going to make a plug for any particular service here, except to say that they do have a lot of resources for parents as well. Um, and one thing that you'll do, whether you're using Clarity or SSS, is you will state what it is you'd like to pay um, for tuition. Um, Keep in mind that schools will look at that number alongside what the algorithms say your family can afford to pay. And so my strong advice to families is to really do their own financial aid analysis before schools do it, and try to close that delta as best you can. It's not a question of how much financial aid you need. It's a question that sometimes families have not done the internal work themselves to look and figure out what would be nice to have and what is essential to have. And when you've done that work, then schools are going to be more apt and ready to have that conversation with you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to kind of move on between questions quickly because we're getting towards
Sure.
the end of time here. We got a lot of questions about testing and how important are SSAT scores. But even one question I liked: why do we even look at standardized testing anymore? Like what's
Yeah.
behind?
It is different than college, right? We don't talk about middle 50s. And if you don't have a certain SAT score at these colleges, you are functionally disqualified from applying. That's not the case in boarding day schools, not any of them. We all really do take a holistic approach, not least of all because we start with kids who are really quite young, right? I mean, we start in ninth grade, some even younger than us. And so we're really investing in the long term and in the growth that students are going to have along the way. Of course, we see students apply from all 50 states, from over 30 countries, and we don't claim to be experts in all these different learning environments, homeschool settings. And so The SSAT and standardized tests can be helpful metrics to understand the strength or challenge of a curriculum that we're less familiar with. They can help us identify excellence when it's not otherwise totally apparent. There are schools that are going to be just less sophisticated about the boarding school admissions process and less comfortable advocating for their students, but having those strong test scores can give us a sense of where a student has risen above the offerings in their local school environment. And in other occasions, it's going to help us benchmark better where they sit. So it's but one part of an application process. Every school will have a different approach to testing. But I would say it's not the kind of thing that you should invest a ton of time in prep at the expense of, thinking about those essays, thinking about visiting, thinking about interviewing. Give it your best shot. Take the test once, take it twice. But by the time you're getting into multiple batteries of the exam and prep, I think you've kind of lost sight of the larger question here, which is it's part of a larger application process. We're going to look to see how well it aligns with other pieces of the application that you've already shared with us.
I'm really glad that you addressed that it's not just, the high scorers who get in and it's a holistic process, because I do think that is the perception. And a lot of times people think of testing as unfair in that way. I think, a lot of schools are looking at it, what educational environment is a student coming from? Someone who's coming from, say, a public school in the inner city, like it's probably expected that their test score is going to be lower than a student coming out of a private school where they've gotten high-end, educational resources at their disposal. And so I think it's just the perception that, that other one student on student A maybe has an unfair disadvantage, which not necessarily true. The school's looking to see, who's successful in their environments, and ultimately, with all the candidates evaluating so many different things, but, where do they fit in the school? What courses they could go into? What advising groups they may need to be put into because
Right.
of where their strengths are and where their areas of growth are. So it's really, it's an admissions assessment, but it's
Right.
really assessing, where the students poised for success at the school and where they potentially need help at the school, to come in. Maybe a student can come in and they can skip the base level course in math and go to the next one, or,
Right.
they need that base level course in English, that sort of thing. So schools really do, as Josh said, every school looks at it a little differently and how they utilize it. There's a lot of applications there, which brings into question the test optional, which I believe you guys are test optional.
Yep.
How do they know when to submit their scores to a test optional school?
Um, I'd say the hard thing about being test optional is the scores we see tend to be pretty high, right? Um, and so as a result of being optional, the scores that we see tend to be pretty high. Um, if it doesn't add to the story, I probably wouldn't send it. If it doesn't add to the overall narrative that you've otherwise created, I might, work with your guidance counselor or your educational consultant to think whether or not this adds to the overall storyline you've built. And that doesn't go for just testing, it goes for everything. So whether you're thinking about, awards, recommendation letters from your senator, whatever it is, remember there are people at the other end of this trying to make sense of all of this and read it all. And we want to do it with compassion, and we want to do it with care, and we want to do it with empathy. And that becomes harder to do when it gets bogged down with a lot of extra stuff. If you hit it out of the park, you did really well for you as you feel on the SSAT, send it to us. Tell us you're really proud. You were going for this score, you got that score. Great. We love supplemental recommendations that tell us something about you, but if your dad is super friendly with your local congressman and promised that they would write a letter for you. We don't need that. So I would say things that are valuable to you and tell us more about who you are, great, send them along. But things that feel like they might just be a little bit of fluff, you can leave them out.
Excellent. I often add to that, if you choose not to submit test scores to the school for any particular reason, after admissions decisions come, and if you decide to enroll in the school, probably a good idea to reach out to the school and ask them if they'd still like to see test scores. Because as I said, a lot of schools will look at them for many different things. So,
Great
once you
point.
have sort of the decision part is done, you're going to the school. Probably a good idea to give them the test scores at that point if they're going to look at it in a way to help evaluate the support they need to give the child and that sort of thing. All right, so we are really kind of at time. One other thing I did want, we always get the question this time of year with testing and when scores will come out and how to submit them to schools, given that, application deadlines for some schools are January 15th. I believe you said yours is February 1st, and
Yep.
we have January testing, February 1st testing. Most schools will accept test results after their application deadline, as Josh said, recommendations and those things too. We just encourage families to let the schools know when you're testing. And Josh, I think you had advice too with if somebody signed up for the January test and the February test, what, should they just wait and see those scores before submitting them for both and let the school know?
Absolutely. I mean, you should certainly, get those scores, um, talk as a family, guidance counselor, educational consultant, and figure out what makes sense and where it makes sense to send it to. Knowing that they are not likely to be that first order thing that we need to have in by the deadline. We know it's going to come a little bit later. Thanks to the standard application online, they're very quick and easy for us to get. Once you click those magic buttons on your end, we can see them where we are very quickly. And so it's not a huge lag for us. We'll get them in. But they're also not going to be, for most students, a large conversation piece. They're gonna add to the overall holistic review.
Excellent. And speaking of those magic buttons, just so everybody's um, aware of how that works, if you put in a school such as KUA as a score recipient that they're going to receive your scores before scores are released, once scores are released, they will go to Josh and the other schools immediately. If you don't put them in as a score recipient and wait until after the scores are released to put them in, then they will go when you put them in. They will get submitted to the school. So if you want to review scores before they get sent to the schools, don't put the school in as a score recipient until they are sent. That said, if you're taking the February test and you want to make sure it's your only test, you want to make sure it gets to the school as quick as possible, especially if you're applying to a test required school, it's a good idea to put them in beforehand just so you don't miss anything and there's not like a couple extra days in there where you could have, the scores could have been sent along to help move things along. All right, Josh, one final question, and this is one that, would definitely be something I would be thinking about. They go through, they click the magic button to submit the application. How do they know everything got received okay?
Um, the SAO makes it pretty clear. You'll get, a number of check boxes filled in. We'll reach out to you. We'll let you know if we're missing something. Some schools will send you an email, and let you know that your application is complete. Most schools will email or call if things are missing. They'll let you know if things are missing, and if you don't hear from a school, then that's an opportunity to sit back and wait for March 10th. Some schools have a portal, whether that's admission.org, the standard application online, or their own, where they log this information and they've sent you login information for that. But you can go to the standard application online and see where your applications have been sent to. But I would say, generally speaking, schools will reach out if they're missing anything. And so good to be checking those emails in the week or two following submission, and know that we intend to communicate that your application is complete, but more often than not, that's inferred, and what we reach out on is the applications that we're still kind of lingering out there.
And then, because that's basically your first part of the review process, right? It's just to go through and make sure all the boxes are checked.
Yep, yep. So, and we do that sort of along the way, really from now until our deadline, and then kind of softly afterwards. But yeah, we're going through and making sure all the boxes are checked, and then reaching out to see where we need to fill in the gaps.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I know a lot of you are, you know, at work and different things and submitting the questions that help power the presentation today. So thank you very much. And Josh, thank you, of course, to you for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this presentation, and for KUA for helping make this possible. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Best of luck in the application process.